Hi, this is Craig Stocks here at Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com. And today we're going to be exploring the Chinese Dragon Nebula, also more formally known as IC4685, I believe. And we're going to process it in PixInsight and Photoshop in a variety of different color palettes. So let me bring you up to speed with what I have done so far. I've already processed the image data in PixInsight. Let me tell you what I did. This combines some data that I captured a couple nights ago, as well as some data that I captured a year ago. Actually, I think around July 1st, so almost exactly a year ago. I keep all of my data on a network attached storage device, so it's real easy to go back and grab something from a year ago. And you can see in WBPP I have the new data as well as the old data just combined in WBPP. This camera doesn't have a rotator, but I think I used the same target definition in Voyager, so it will be, it should line up almost exactly. There's 600-second hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur. And then red, green, and blue, apparently last year I shot 2-minute subs, and this year I shot 5-minute subs. I'll wind up just using the 5-minute and ignoring the 2-minute subs. And then I have, of course, flats, darks, and biases. And the rest of it's pretty straightforward. I just defined an output directory for the Chinese Dragon and then ran WBPP. That gave me actually 9 sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen, red, green, and blue at both 300 and 120 seconds. From that, I loaded the sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen in the 300-second red, green, and blue. I combined the red, green, and blue into an RGB image, and that's what we see here, just using channel combination. And then I just ran through my standard sequence of using, in this case I used Graxpert as a gradient removal tool. Sometimes I use gradient correction, sometimes Graxpert. You can see there's a little bit of a registration artifact in the RGB, so we'll be cropping that out when we get into Photoshop. I ran Blur Exterminator, spectrophotometric color calibration on the RGB, and then I stretched everything just using the screen transfer function, slightly modified. I usually stretch it just a little bit more than the default. Applied that with the histogram transformation tool. And then lastly, I ran Noise Exterminator and Star Exterminator, and that gave me these 5 files, sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen, the RGB and RGB stars. Those are the 5 that I want to keep. And I have saved these as 16-bit TIFFs. So now we can hop into Photoshop, which is where really the fun happens. The processing in PixInsight is, for the most part, just turn the crank and follow the process. Photoshop is where we really get to have fun. So we'll start with File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and that brings up this dialog box where we can browse for the files that we want to load into the Layers palette. And these are the 5 files that I just saved. So click OK. That loads those 5 files. Now OK again, and that will actually load these 5 files in the Layers palette. And if you haven't seen my video showing the Photoshop user interface and also the one on using actions, I would encourage you to go check those out. Having a well-organized workspace is a big time saver. Likewise, actions is a really big time saver. And I'm going to use my action. I've got stars, and then it is hydrogen, sulfur, oxygen. And I really need it hydrogen, oxygen, then sulfur, or SOH from the bottom up, HOS from the top down. The 3 narrowband filters order doesn't really matter, other than the action was recorded assuming that they're going to be in this order for naming and color mapping. So now I can select the stars layer on top, open up my actions palette, and click on Make Astro Layers, and it will do all the work of organizing the layers for me. Now, in my action, I also included these text layers that show me the color that I have sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen mapped. I'm going to go ahead and turn those off. So I can click on the layers palette. There's a set of filters, and one of the filters is text. So this will filter for text type layers. There are the 3 text layers, and I'll just turn those off. And now I'll unclick on the filter, and we're back to the main view. And let me close this flyout. So first thing I like to do, I'll start at the bottom. I've got the RGB that just kind of went along for the ride. The action only works on the first 4 layers. So the RGB layers at the bottom, I'll just drop that into a layer group, label it RGB, and I'm sure I'm going to add a levels adjustment, so I'll go ahead and add that and then turn this off. And now I want to kind of normalize each one of the 3 narrowband layers. So I'm going to turn off everything but sulfur, and then I'll open up the sulfur layer group. And it's much easier to see if I turn off the hue saturation layer. And I'll look at the levels, and what I want to make sure is that I don't have anything clipped to black, but that I'm using all of the dark green. And I want to look at the whites, and you can see the data ends about here, so that's maybe 3/4 of the way to white. The histogram is showing black to white. So I'll grab the white slider and drag it back to about where the data begins. And I don't want to drive anything to pure white. I don't want to drive anything to pure black. I want to use the full range of tones though. So that's the sulfur. And now I'll just do the same thing with oxygen. Open up the layer group, turn off the hue saturation. This one I can darken the blacks slightly, and again I'll brighten the whites just a little bit. And I'll do the same thing with hydrogen. This one I have a fair amount of a gap on the black end, so I'm going to move the black slider in. And I'm working with a black background on the canvas, so I have a visual reference of how black is black. And again, I'll brighten the white slider. And at this point, I should be able to turn on my oxygen and sulfur and have a first pass at color mapping this as an SHO image. There's a fair amount of red and blue in the background. So I know red's coming from sulfur and blue's coming from oxygen. So I can start with the sulfur, and I'm going to now visually fine-tune these levels. At this point, I'm not going to change the color. I'm just going to change the levels. And so, for instance, if I darken the black slider on oxygen, that's taking blue out of the dark areas. And I'll take some more red out. And I may need to add a little bit of, let's see. There's quite a bit of green from the hydrogen, as you can see. This is really kind of a fun nebula because there's a lot of each gas, and each gas is pretty uniquely distributed. For instance, there's a lot of oxygen here in the center, a lot of sulfur in these toes, a lot of hydrogen back here and surrounding the oxygen. So you get a lot of variety. Now, one thing I have found frequently helps, and that's each one of these narrowband layer groups is in screen blending mode. If I look at the layer group, you can see it's in screen blending mode. Right now, there's nothing turned on below those, so it's like having it on a black layer. If I turn on this RGB layer at the bottom, I'm basically using that as the foundation. And usually it makes the image a little too bright because these are all in screen blending mode. But I find frequently it helps add a little bit of detail, and it helps tame some of that green SHO color I will go to the levels adjustment here and tone it down a little bit. And let's start with something like that. I don't mind the green personally. If I want to adjust the green, I have a couple different options. The green is all coming from hydrogen because this is SHO. We really have two options to deal with it. The first would be to reduce the intensity of the hydrogen, and I would do that with the levels adjustment. So by darkening darken the midpoint slider, by taking out some of the green in the hydrogen, that reduces that green cast. So that's one approach to cleaning it up a little bit, cleaning up the green, I should say. The other thing I could do is go to the hue saturation layer for the hydrogen, and right now it's color mapped as pure green, and that's a 120 on the hue rotation angle. If I slide it back towards yellow or even orange, that takes out the green and gives it a little bit more pleasing color, but you'll notice we start to lose the blue from the oxygen. Generally what I find is if I move the hydrogen back towards yellow or red, then I also need to go to the oxygen and move it from blue back towards cyan. And this gives me what I like to call a natural SHO. You can even take the hydrogen well into the red if you want. Something like that. And then adjust the oxygen. So this is still an SHO image. We have sulfur is red, but we have hydrogen color mapped as kind of an orange, red-orange instead of green. So let's say something like that. And if I turn the text layers back on, I can just filter for the text layers, turn on my 3. So now you can see we have sulfur's red, hydrogen is kind of a yellow-orange, and oxygen is cyan. Normally I would then want to do some global adjustments to this, so I'll turn on the global adjustments. It's a little on the bright side, so I'll reduce the brightness. If I want to do a global color balance adjustment, I can do that with the color balance. Typically I may want to increase the saturation a little bit, and you can even target individual colors. So for instance, I might target the reds and make them more red, and then target the yellows and make them less red, just to get a little bit more separation. I might want to come back to the hydrogen and make it a little bit more yellow, just to bring out some of that depth. So we still have an SHO image. I love this little streamer down here of hydrogen, or I guess sulfur and oxygen. That's kind of cool. The last thing we have is our stars, and you can see when I turn the stars layer on, it just kind of obliterates everything. So I'm going to do a couple things to reduce the stars. First, I'm going to take out some of the little tiny stars that just look like noise, and I'm going to do that by using a dust and scratches filter, but I don't want to apply the filter directly. I want to apply it non-destructively. So I'm going to convert this layer into a smart object. Now I can apply filters non-destructively. So I'll go to Filter, Noise, Dust and Scratches, and usually with this scope somewhere around 4 or 5 pixels, we'll take out those little stars. Let's try 5 pixels. And you can see before and after. It does soften it a little bit, so I'm going to now add a Smart Sharpen Adjust filter. And the exact settings on these, because these are smart filters, I can return and change these filter amounts, sharpening amounts at any time, even after I save and close. I can still reopen this if I save it with all of the layers intact. And then the last thing I'll do to reduce the stars is use the levels adjustment layer. And moving the black slider really cleans up those dark areas. The midpoint slider cleans up the overall star brightness. So you can see quite a difference in the stars before and after. This is without the levels adjustment. This is with the levels adjustment. So you can just play with this levels adjustment and make the stars however prominent you want. So for an SHO image, that's pretty decent. If we wanted to explore, for instance, an HOO image, let me save this first. So I'm going to do File, Save As, and I'm going to save this in my 2025 photos. So that'll be under Photos 2025, and I want to save this as a large document format. So that's saved as, and it's saving, but I can still work, but that's saving as a large document. Let's make this an HOO image. So to do that, I'm just going to close up these groups so that I have a little bit more real estate to work from. I'll turn off the RGB for the time being. Let's just turn off the sulfur. And let's go to the hydrogen color and we'll make it red. And we'll go to the oxygen, and it's already cyan, so we're already in a pretty good spot for it. We can brighten these a little bit. Brightening up the hydrogen, or I'm sorry, the oxygen. Let's brighten the hydrogen and really bring out the red. So there's an HOO image. If we wanted to add sulfur back in, if we wanted to make an HSO, hydrogen sulfur oxygen, so there we're just bringing in a little sulfur as orange. Make it as bright yellow or green as we want. And again, this is the real beauty of working non-destructively in Photoshop, is I don't have to guess how strong I want the sulfur. I can visually watch as I adjust the color or the intensity of the sulfur. I can visually watch the image and dial it in very quickly to what I want. If I want to get back to that classic SHO, I'll just take the hydrogen back to 120 or thereabouts. Take the oxygen back to 240. I think that's 246. There we go. And we'll take the sulfur back to red. So there we're back to the SHO image. Bring up the reds a little bit, and let's dial back the brightness of the hydrogen. So the point is that working in Photoshop gives you lots of flexibility, and you can adjust things as you go visually. Non-destructive, I can save this, close it, reopen it later. If I decide I want the stars to be more prominent, I can go back to my stars layer and turn the brightness up. If I want them to be less dominant, I can turn the brightness down. I can get rid of them altogether just by turning the layer off. So you have just almost infinite variability in how you adjust this. So that looks interesting. I think I liked the more natural SHO better, the version that we saved. If I want to get back to that version that I saved, it's probably still in my history. I think by default Photoshop saves the last 50 steps. And so here the last step was modify levels layer and then save as. So if I click on that, that'll take me back to that version that I saved. I think maybe I'd like to see a little bit more blue in here, so I'm going to go to the oxygen and brighten up the mid-tone a little bit. And we might even want to tinker with the color of the blue, and then let's bring up the hydrogen a little bit more, so take it a little bit more towards yellow. I think that's the way I like this image best. Once I get into Lightroom, I'll crop this registration artifact at the top out. I think I'll turn off the color key, so turn off those 3 text layers. That's pretty close to a finished image. I think the last thing I'm going to do is rotate it 180 degrees to more of its normal orientation in the sky. So I'll just go to Image Rotation, 180 degrees, and that's going to rotate everything 180 degrees. That's not a good sign. But it did rotate it. And the only problem is now my sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen are at the top. So I can select these, Control T or Command T on a Mac to do a free transform. I could rotate these 180 degrees, slide it down to the bottom, click OK. And that's a pretty finished image. So I hope you found this useful. I would encourage you to work this way in Photoshop and then explore different ways of color mapping. I say the beauty is that you can really focus on what it looks like rather than being a slave to just pure red, pure green, and pure blue. And typically when you use red, green, and blue, it's not at all uncommon to have to try to tame or dial back the green because it gets to be pretty dominant in the image. Hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, drop those in the comments down below. And as always, I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.